in this part of the lesson, what we are going to do is taking a look at the approaches we have. Now, in terms of political science, now imagine political science is like a house, like a mansion. Okay. So what we did last week was basically entering from the gate and having an idea about what's there in the garden, right? Who laid the foundation, who started who started the construction of this house and all that, right? Now we have come to the door. Now we are going to enter this house. Now we are going to enter political science. So before that, we need to take a look at what doors we have to enter this subject. Approaches are like doors that you can enter this subject. Okay. So there are 7 approaches that we can say. There are more approaches. There are more than like 10, 15 approaches. We have chosen 7 approaches and a couple of other approaches also, which are not there in the syllabus, but we shall study because sometimes those questions come in the paper. Before that, we need to briefly take a look at what sort of concepts that we would study. Now, what do you study? What is the content you study if you are studying political science academically, right? Now, look at this note, right? Politics can be identified as a social process that is originated from the human social activities. The subject that studied this process in an academic method is political science. That should be studies, method type of studies. The academic studies of politics have a long history which runs up to 4th century BC. Studying political science as a subject was initiated during the Greek era with the contributions of philosophers such as Aristotle, Plato, and Socrates, the three great philosophers. Hence, political science is one of the oldest sciences in the world with an academic content of the subject which has been rapidly evolving for nearly 25 centuries. Last week also we saw how power politics came in, how behavioralism came in with the contributions of like Polybius, Cicero, Seneca, St. Augustine, Machiavelli, Thomas Hobbes, Max Weber, and the behavioralists, right? So it has been evolving. However, let's see, the academic content of political science is vast and diverse. In general, territories of the subject can be summarized as follows. So keep in mind, this is not a conclusive list, but we are basically looking at the main aspects that you would look at in political science. So first you have to study about political institutions. This includes politically established institutions that handle the process of governance. Political science analyzes these institutes in terms of structure, content, powers, and the connection between each other. Right? So when it comes to governance, you need certain institutions, and these are the institutions we are going to discuss about. Right? Legislature, executive, judiciary, regional governments, local government bodies. You study about these institutions. That's one of the main things you study. So you study about a president, now that's an executive. You study about a parliament, that's a legislature, right? Judiciary, regional governments, all these things, these are the institutions we are supposed to study about. Then, of course, when it comes to governance, this includes different types of practical governing methods. Each method is analyzed in terms of power and the role it has on the state format, the impact on the lives of citizens, etc. Now, there are different ways you can run a government. There are democratic governments like Sri Lanka, right? There are monarchies where, like, Saudi Arabia and Brunei, where they still have a king, like a monarchy, right? Autocracies, North Korea, they have Kim Jong Un. Those people, they're like autocratic governments, dictators, different ways. Like you have Cuba, which is socialist. You have USA, which is liberal democratic. You have Sri Lanka, which is social democratic. So different methods are there when it comes to the governance. And of course, political behavior. This was the part which was introduced by the behavioralist in the American universities. How people behave in terms of politics. This includes the different patterns of human behavior in terms of politics. Mainly, there are psychological reasons and external reasons behind the political behavior of humans. Political science studies the reason, the nature, and the results of these behaviors. Why do people behave in certain ways when it comes to politics, right? Why do people from rural areas mainly vote for Rajapakshas, and why do people in urban areas mostly vote against Rajapakshas? Now that's psychological, and there are external factors adding to those, right? What else do you study? Political theories. This is considered the most important part of political science in terms of the academic content. This includes the theoretical concepts that were developed by great minds of political science. So, liberalism, Marxism, separation of powers, sovereignty, um, social contract theory, these things are like political theories. These are created by great minds. Now, there were some political scientists back then. When it comes to a certain question, they came up with an answer, which was an idea, and that idea became an ideology, and the ideology became a political theory. Now, we shall look into this process in detail in the second unit. Right. For now, keep in mind political theory is basically a political ideology when it has a following. Right. Now, if I give you an example, can any of you tell me what is the parent subject of political science? What is the parent subject of political science? Do you remember? Aristotle made political science independent from which subject? Philosophy, right? Philosophy was the parent subject of political science. So in philosophy, what do you do? In philosophy, you ask fundamental questions. You ask fundamental questions and you look for answers. We shall look into it in a bit. So when people were asking questions, fundamental questions about what is liberty, what is freedom, what is liberty, some people came up with different answers, and there were great minds who came up with the idea of being liberal in a political society, right? So it created the ideology of liberalism. Some person came up with that idea and created the idea of liberalism, and that when that idea became an ideology, and that ideology started receiving following by people, it became a political theory, right? You don't need to completely understand that at the moment, because the second unit is basically a thorough explanation of what I just gave you in a nutshell. For now, keep in mind that you should be studying these political theories. If you are studying political science, that's a must. Then, of course, political uses and practicalities. This includes the practical aspect of political theories. The conceptual content created by political scientists do have different practical applications under different circumstances. Political science studies these differences comparatively. Now, that part is important, comparatively. That's why you have something called comparative politics, right? It's what you do when you are studying political science. You compare this and that, this theory, that theory, this practicality, that practicality. How does something work in the US? How does something work in Sri Lanka? Like that. Right. Any questions up to that point, guys? It's pretty straightforward. Now comes to the important part. This is something you all need to like intensely study. What we studied thus far, other than the area politics and political science, other areas, it's okay to have a general idea. It's basically like a preview of what you should study in the future. But that politics and political science part and this part, this is important. Okay. So these are the approaches to study political science. Now we are at the door. We are looking at the doors, what sort of doors we have to access this subject. Approaches. Okay. Right. So take a look at the approaches. When studying political science as a professional subject, there are many approaches that can be followed with different advantages and disadvantages. Each approach is ideal in different situations. So you can't exactly say this is the best approach. Each has its own advantages, disadvantages, and different ones can be useful, ideal in different situations, right? Now, I believe you all have the printed note with you all. So if you all have the printed note, under this, you have to write the other ones that you should be aware of. Huh? So what are the main ones here? Philosophical approach. You call that normative approach as well. then comparative approach, multidisciplinary approach, scientific approach, you call it behavioral also, political economic approach, sociological approach, feminist approach, right? Now the first thing you need to do is that put a collective bracket to these three. And what should you write? I think we wrote this once. What should you write? Pre-behavioral. Put a collective bracket and write, maybe using a pencil, right? Pre-behavioral, because you can see the fourth one is the behavioral approach, and these three existed before behavioralism came. So these are like the ancient ones that we've been having since Greek era, right? Then these are post-behavioral. Actually, some of them were like founded even before behavioralism came, but these things actually came to the spotlight after behavioralism took a backlash. So we consider these ones to be post-behavioralist. Now, please note, this is not to include in your answers. This is for you all to have a better understanding of how these approaches work. That's like a timeline. 3 before, 3 after. Method behavioralist. Okay, right. Now come down to this. I have left some space here for you all to write a little bit of notes, right? So you can put a small subtopic or something like that saying other approaches, and you can write these down. Historical approach. Historical approach. Then observational approach. Observational approach. Then statistical approach. Geographical approach. Then legal point of view. Legal point of view. Okay. So basically these things will not have a note, right? But have an idea, because sometimes for short questions, these kind of questions can be asked, right? Okay. Right. So let's take a look at philosophical approach. Right. So now first thing you need to understand, first thing you need to comprehend is the fact that this is the oldest approach we have in political science. Now, I asked a question like a couple of minutes ago. What is the parent subject of political science? The parent subject is philosophy, right? So, in philosophy, what do you do? What sort of a question? What sort of a subject is philosophy? What do you do in philosophy? You ask questions. You ask questions that don't really have like a one-liner answer, neither one specific answer, right? What is life? Does it have like a one-liner answer? Right? Unless Nashita tells me what is life, she may say pizza. That may be the right answer for her. Is that it? I know I see a lot of teenage girls liking pizza for some reason. They like pizza so much for some reason. She may say that, like to her, that may be correct. What is life? Pizza. Why ask Rifki, what is life? Gaming. Right? You may give an answer like that, but that's not specific. It can be something else to someone else, right? And it's difficult to give the answer with a one-liner also, right? So in philosophy, that's what we do. We ask fundamental questions, right? What is life? What is the meaning of life? Why do we do certain things? Why do we love people? Why do we seek affection? Why do we study? Why do we crave success? Why do we expect respect? None of these questions have a specific answer. So, what philosophy does is, as a subject, looking for answers. Knowing that there is no specific answer, that doesn't stop them from going and looking for answers. So, at least we can have somewhat of an idea. We can have a somewhat of an idea what life is. We can have somewhat of an idea what love is. We can have a somewhat of an idea why do people seek success? Why do people crave power? We can have somewhat of an idea, right? That's what philosophy does. And as you know that political science came from philosophy. It was inside philosophy at one point. So similarly, what is happening here is that you use the same methodology. What you do is you ask questions. But this time, what is the difference when it comes to political science? You ask questions which are relevant to politics. That's what you do. So when it comes to fundamental questions like what is state? What is power? Why do citizens obey the state? Why do we need a state? What sort of a connection does the state and the citizens have? And these questions are like those previous questions I told you. They don't have a specific answer. But according to political philosophy, what we can do is we can search for answers, knowing that there's no specific answer, but you still look for answers, right? What happens when you're looking for answers for these questions? Some of us, the smart ones, the great ones, they come up with excellent answers. They are not always accurate, like not entirely accurate, as you know that you can't have an exactly accurate answer for this. But somewhat they make a lot of sense, right? Somewhat they make a lot of sense. So those ideas that they came up with as answers to these questions become ideologies because other people recognize this. Wow, that guy has a really good answer to this question. So people get aware of this, people become aware of this person's idea on this certain question, hence it becomes an ideology. And people start following that. You know what? That is convincing. I'm going to believe what he says. Then it becomes a political theory. That is the process of the development of the subject in political science. What you do, the first thing you do is philosophy, political philosophy. That's the first thing you do. You ask questions. What is state? What is liberty? And all that. And then when great minds give answers to these questions, some of those answers are excellent ideas. Some of those answers, some of those ideas stand out among the others because they make a lot of sense. It makes tons of sense. So they become ideologies. And when people start following those, they become political theories. Liberalism is something like that. At one point in life, someone asked a question, what is liberty? The person was thinking to himself, what is liberty? What is freedom? And there was someone who sort of explained what being liberal is. And that idea became liberalism, an ideology, because that answer stood out among the others. So when liberalism was followed by many other people, it became a theory. And today it's a theory, right? So in political philosophy, what you do is you ask questions, which is really important. So as the philosophical approach, we are going the old school way that political science have been always going with since the ancient Greek era, asking fundamental questions and trying to look for answers. Ask fundamental questions, look for answers. Right? That's the typical way of studying philosophy, and that's the typical way of studying political science as well. That's why you call it the philosophical approach. Now, why do you call it the normative approach? What do you mean by normative? Normative means value based, values. What is good, what is bad, right? What is right and what is wrong. So philosophical approach does that. They decide, they give a value to everything. Now in philosophical approach, you take liberty, you give a value to liberal governance. Liberal governance is good. It's the right thing to do. Why? Because people have their freedom. People are happier in a liberal system. They refuse, they don't agree with monarchies. When a king governs you, why don't they agree with that? They say that is wrong, that is bad because people are not happy, people are suppressed, people have to follow what the monarch says. That's why they say following liberalism is better. Norms, normative, that means value based, saying what is right and what is wrong. Understand? So when it comes to philosophical approach, there are three main features. What are the three main features? First, you ask fundamental questions. Then you start looking for answers. Third, you develop norms, normative goals. You have normative goals, deciding, determining what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is bad. Understand? This is what philosophical approach does, right? That's why you call it normative approach also, right? Okay, so let's read the note. Shamil, can you read the note?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead. Either you can read it off the screen. If you have the printed note in your hand, you can read that as well.
All right, sir. This is identified as one of the oldest approaches in political science during the Greek era. Studying politics was heavily attached with philosophy. In the subject of philosophy, the world is interpreted. This includes studying the beginning and the end of life. Also, some have interpreted philosophy as finding answers to questions of whether it is possible to know the world. Therefore, from the past to the present, different people, classes, and groups have developed philosophical concepts in order to define the human life, society, and the world. Studying political science through philosophy is known the philosophical approach. Plato and Aristotle are considered the pioneers of this approach. In general, following philosophers are considered as important in terms of this approach. Plato, Aristotle, Cicero, St. Augustine, Nicolai Machiavelli, Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, Hegel, Karl Marx, Mahatma Gandhi, Hannah Arendt, John Rawls, Charles Taylor, Immanuel Kant, Jürgen Habermas. Basically, in this approach,
Hold on, Shamil, for a second. Uh, you can continue in a bit. I just want, it's not important, but I just wanted to tell you all how to pronounce these names. If you all want, just write it below how to pronounce some of these names. It goes as Plato, Aristotle, Cicero, St. Augustine, Niccolo Machiavelli, Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, okay, although he has an E, a silent E at the end of his name, John Locke, Hegel, Karl Marx, Mahatma Gandhi, Hannah Arendt, John Rawls, Charles Taylor, Immanuel Kant, and Jürgen Habermas or Habermas. Jürgen Habermas or Habermas. Okay, right. Continue, Shamil.
basically in this approach, good and bad values of a political concept are examined in a normative point of view. This approach has three main features. One, questioning and finding answers for fundamental about the world. Second one, attempting to clarify the basic concepts that used to define the world. Third one, focusing on normative goals in politics. Questioning and finding answers on the fundamentals about the world. This feature is not limited to politics. In fact, it involves a vast area of the human society of the world. However, these fundamental questions have a political application which creates fundamental political questions. Attempting to example, fundamental questions. What is the world? How does the world exist? Is it possible to know the world? What is human life? What is the meaning of human life? Example for politically fundamental questions. What is politics? What is the state? What is the purpose of the state? What are the tasks of the state? Why should citizens obey the state? Under what circumstances should the citizens stand against the state? Political philosophers are born as a result of philosophers trying to find answers for these questions. However, the philosophical approach focuses on what the answer should be instead of what the answer should be remote from the reality. What is the connection between citizens and the government? What should be the connection between the citizens and the government? The first statement comes under the scientific approach and the second philosophical approach. In this background, the philosophical approach provides an idea on the better framework on the state. The Republic by Plato, Utopia by Thomas More, Das Kapital by Karl Marx, all provide a better political framework that should exist.
Okay, hold on.
Attempting
Hold on a second. So highlight these names and these books. Those are the ones they normally ask for, like short questions. The Republic by Plato, Utopia by Thomas More, Das Kapital by Karl Marx. Okay, these are like the pinnacles of philosophical approach. Basically, filled with norms, like saying what should be there, what should exist. Right, continue.
attempting to clarify the basic concepts that are used to define the world. Under this approach, many important political concepts such as justice, equity, equality, liberty, rights, duties are studied in depth. Focusing on normative goals in politics. Philosophical approach focuses a lot in normative goals. Basically, nominative means value oriented. Normative means value oriented. In general, the society has a value judgment on everything as good, bad, fair, noble, etc. These values are normative yardsticks as these values have been created by humans themselves. Philosophical approach focuses on the value in order to create a better political society. This idea of identifying democracy, liberty, equality, etc. are good concepts is a normative value that is established by the philosophical approach. Overall, the normative concept of philosophical approach has two meanings. One, the political thinking should not end at merely studying political concept but should focus on making the political society a better place. Second one, the purpose of studying political science not merely by studying the nature of political elements but to study political elements and suggest the best way of political application for the benefit of the citizens. In conclusion, main features of a philosophical approach are as follows. First one, studying relevant concepts in depth. Second one, examining fundamental political problems. Third one, focusing on normative values in politics. Other than these, being one of the oldest approaches focusing on what should exist instead of what really exists, providing a hypothetical political perfection on conclusions being remote from the reality can also be considered as sub-features of this approach.
Right, okay. Guys, why don't you take like a 5 minutes break? Because I want you all to like be fresh, and because from this point onwards we get into like the territory that you all should be like really familiar. It's like, I want you all to properly focus and properly comprehend this part. Huh? So we can proceed again at 1:30, right? Eat something, take washroom breaks, take a breather, and come back.